Valiquette from Animation Resources, and I'm here today with Michael Fukushima from the NFB. Have a little chat, find a little bit about his career, and share that with you guys today. So, want to give you a little introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hi, I'm Michael Fukushima. I'm an animation producer at the National Film Board of Canada, based in Montreal. And I'm here to be interviewed by Mike.
So we're going to get a little bit of background first. You've been at this for a while.
A long while.
A long while now. Longer for all of us, it seems as each day that goes by. You started out trying to be an engineer.
Yep.
And that didn't quite stick. Can you give us a little background? First of all, coming at this thing, engineering is a long way off from animation. Were you a cartoon kid? Like, how did this path happen? What got you there to animation?
You know, I come from a Japanese family, and so art was never a career path, a viable career path. Okay. And you know, all through school, public school, elementary school, high school, you know, a pretty top-notch student, pretty capable, and so my parents had, you know, they had conventional expectations of me to do conventional things, and you know, I liked science. I still like science and math, and so engineering just seemed a perfect fit. Yeah, I drew, I sketched. My father, I discovered later in adulthood, had been a closet artist himself, had always wanted to do that, but couldn't for similar reasons.
Okay.
And so, you know, maybe there's something in the way he raised me or something in the DNA that was always there. You know, I went to Queen's. I just didn't enjoy engineering. Yeah. And spent some time trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And a friend of the brother of a friend was going to Sheridan College at the time and showed me some of the stuff he was doing. And I was just fascinated. And you know, I loved movies, I loved drawing, I loved movement. I didn't really know what animation was, but I knew all of these things. And then when he showed me the stuff he was doing, it was like, wow, I could maybe do that. And
I'm going to date you here. So what era is this in terms of Sheridan and animation?
I graduated from Sheridan in 84.
84.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went to Queen's in 80, and I got into Sheridan, I guess it was in 81.
Okay, so it was a pretty quick jump from engineering into animation.
Yeah. Once I realized that it wasn't for me,
yeah.
I needed to find something else to do. I had parental pressure on me. Find something to do.
So it had to be a real job.
I had to do something.
Okay.
Yeah. I couldn't just futz around.
Now, from Sheridan, though, you didn't go and work. I know a lot of guys, I think of the same era, went straight to Nelvana, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was Nelvana, there was Don Bluth, was hiring in Ireland. It was that era, and so a lot of my classmates and guys older than me and a little bit younger than me were heading off to studio jobs. And these guys were, they were almost all guys. Yeah. They were all extremely talented. Draftsmen and animators. I've always been kind of okay, competent. Yeah, so I think your question is then going to, you know, what did I do? From my second year at Sheridan, I realized I wanted to be an auteur filmmaker. I wanted to make my own films, and that's really what I focused on. I focused on learning how to tell stories, learning how to be cinematic, how to be a filmmaker. My final year project was a film. It was a short 3.5-minute film, whereas many of my classmates were building demo reels for interviews. Yeah. I sent my film out to festivals. It was quite successful as a student film, and the bug got me, and I said, this is what I want to do. And so I started up a small, you know, it's a studio. I was a freelancer.
Okay.
I had to discover in myself all of those skills and traits that college doesn't teach you. I had to learn how to cold call. I had to learn how to negotiate fees. I had to learn how to manage time and money.
How to be a businessman.
How to be a businessman, which, you know, no art school teaches. No. You know, they teach you how to be a great artist and a technician, but none of that. So it was a daunting several months.
Well, it sounds, I mean, both sides of it. I mean, if you're setting out to be an auteur filmmaker at that time, it's not like the technology was exactly where it's at today either. I mean, we're talking about big cameras and processing, and it was not as accessible a thing to do as it is today.
Yeah.
So you were taking on a lot in that approach. If you're, I mean, we're talking about your parents wanting you to have a career and a job, you took the path less taken in two spots there. So, I mean, coming out of school then, getting this boutique, what kind of work was there available to a small boutique shop that you're talking about right at that time?
I managed, it took a good 8 9 months before I got my first gig.
Yeah.
But I got a gig doing industrial training films, 5-6 minute little animation pieces, very limited animation for institutional training purposes.
Okay.
And I did a few of those, and then some small ads, things like that.
And how long did this chapter?
This was about probably 3 years,
Yeah.
3 or 4 years of my life, and in that time, I was developing a short film as well that didn't go anywhere. But I was also going to the Ottawa Film Festival and other festivals, and doing my best to introduce myself to NFB people. And
So you set your sights on the NFB at that stage?
by the time I was starting third year of Sheridan, the NFB was my nirvana.
Okay.
I knew that's where I wanted to go.
Really?
Yeah. I took a history of animation there. I can't remember who my teacher was, but we saw all the NFB classics. And I didn't really know the NFB prior to that.
Well, that's something we still see today in a lot of the schools even. I mean, there's this animal that is Canadian animation and our whole community, but the NFB kind of is its own pocket unto itself, quite separate from our TV industry, which is so huge. And I mean, I've taught in school as well, and it seems to be there's very little awareness of a career path outside of TV animation in Canada. And I mean, not to deviate too much, but I mean, things like the Hot House program, I have finally seen people coming from more sort of mainstream areas in animation and moving towards the NFB. There seems to be a little more cross-pollination happening these days. We'll stick to you though first before we get to that part. So you set your sights on the NFB because it was a natural home for an auteur filmmaker.
Yeah.
How long did that take? Like, what was your way in?
That was probably a 4-year process of getting to know some people and getting to know the executive producer at the time. And
So you schmoozed.
Best as a 22-year-old can schmooze, I schmoozed. And I would send in proposals every couple of years just to maintain contact. And then there was a convergence of events in '89.
Okay.
In '89, the Canadian government had just made its formal apology to the Japanese Canadian community for the Second World War internment of the Japanese Canadians. They had set up a foundation that was a secretariat that was mandated to educate the Canadian public about the War Measures Act and about the internment and things like that. And they were looking for educational and media materials. Okay. And they had a big pot of money, and they went to the NFB and said, look, we could probably use some films, but we don't know anything about film. Are there films that could be made on this subject? And it turns out, it just so happens that a couple of months before that, I had sent in a 3-page storyboard treatment about, it was fictionalized, but about a little boy who gets sent to an internment camp. I didn't, I had no intention of making a documentary or about my father or anything like that. And the exec producer, they both came on to his desk and he said, wow, okay, here's a guy who's been bugging me for a few years, and here's a pot of money, and well, this is pretty interesting, and it's a great social issue. I'll see if I can put them together.
Okay.
And so he invited me to come in. We did a bit of brainstorming with a couple of the producers and talked about some stuff, and I refined my idea. And in the course of just talking with a couple of the producers, it became evident that, in fact, it should be the story of my father.
Okay.
And so then the approach became, how do you do an animated documentary about a subject like this. Because in 1989 or 1990, when we actually started production, there were not a lot of animated documentaries. It was not a form at that point.
Right.
I mean, it's a form now. It's become quite popular, and I'm happy with that. But in '90, you know, I think Paul Fierlinger in the States was doing it, and that was about it.
Yeah, yeah. So, just to name drop, who were you dealing with? Like, what producers brought you in?
So the exec producer at the time was a guy named Doug McDonald. And he told me later on in the production, you know, that in fact he was intrigued by the project because he in fact had a family history related.
So everybody had a personal stake, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. And I was my formal NFB producer was a guy named Bill Pettigrew, who had been there for quite some time, and actually cut his teeth in documentary and became an animation producer. And David Verrill was a producer at the time, and you know, so it was a good environment. And David was his strength was always in editing, and so he was a great help for me, both in storyboard editing and then, you know, when we were sitting on the Steenbeck.
Right.
Yeah. You must know what a Steenbeck is.
Yeah, I did learn on one of those.
Yeah. He would help me cut 16 millimeter film. Actually, it was 35 millimeter film and 16 millimeter mag stock on the Steenbeck.
Wow.
Yeah. That's how old I am.
Yeah, we're dating ourselves. I was one of the last guys at Concordia to learn on one of those big. Yeah, they would lock us in the basement and for your first film, and tell you that piece of glass is going to cost $6,000 to fix in 6 months. Yeah, and and there's no one else in the building with you, and they lock the door and they leave you alone.
Yeah.
So it's a little less pressure today, I think.
Yeah, there was no undo button.
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. But then you could cut it out later in the film stage on the Steenbeck.
Yeah.
So the transition then, how long were you a director for the NFB? How long were you doing that stage?
I guess I was a director for about 7 years.
Yeah.
So I actually finished 2 films with the studio, Minoru, the film I've been talking about my father, and then I did an educational film for the studio on lead poisoning in the home. Meant to be a comedy, but unfortunately there were too many government agencies that were involved.
So a lot of agenda.
Yeah, and so it became like a comedy wannabe.
Okay. Okay, I get it. All right.
Yeah.
Then the transition then to producer, because you've been doing that for a long time now.
Yeah, I became a producer in '97. Now that I think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did that happen? Like, what's the transition there? First of all, you're working as a director for the NFB, exclusively working on your own films for the NFB, or were you doing anything else at the time?
No, I was also teaching animation at Concordia. I'd been a prof, not a prof, but I'd been a teacher there for I think 5 years.
What years was that? Sorry.
That would have been 90. I think I started in '92. Yeah, and then I finished. I finished when I became a producer.
Okay, I was there in '93, '94.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you wouldn't. Yeah, I wasn't there very much. I was not a good student. I just had that conversation with Wendy Tilby at the festival. No reason why she should remember me. Okay, so then the transition.
Wendy was very diligent about attendance.
Yes, she was.
Yes, I wasn't.
I got lots of absentees on her. Yeah. So back to you.
Yeah.
That transition, I find that really intriguing to move as from a truly creative standpoint as a director. And
right.
Not that there's nothing creative, but to become what is traditionally that suit role, that business role.
Right.
I mean, you'd had a hands-on business training, running your own boutique. So was that part of what sort of made you a good prospect for them, or was it an organic process? Like, how does that happen with getting on board in that way with the NFB?
Right. I think that may have had a little bit to do with it, my past life before the NFB. But no, again, it was, at the time it was feeling like every 5 years something was happening in my life and I needed to make a change. And it was around that time I was very active in community work, Japanese Canadian community around the country, in Montreal, doing activist stuff. So I was becoming an activist. And
your long-haired hippie days?
Exactly. I had a big ponytail. Really, I had a ponytail. I mean, no one can notice it now, but I did. So there was all of that, and I had come as a freelancer. I was a freelancer still as a director.
Yeah.
These were the days there were staff filmmakers at the NFB.
Yeah.
And so in any given year there were maybe 3 spots available for a freelancer to come in and make a film. So a very tight shop.
Yeah.
Pretty exclusive. And I was frustrated by that, even though I was making a film. I was frustrated with that, and a lot of my friends outside were frustrated with that and would complain bitterly. And so that was playing in the back of my mind. And I was, so I wanted to find a way to try to open up the film board a little bit. And at the same time, I was realizing, I don't think I can keep spending 3 years making one short film for the rest of my life. I just I couldn't see myself doing that. So all of those things came together, and I was agitating. I was agitated myself, trying to find a way to affect some kind of change at the NFB. And one of the producers retired, and David Verrill had been the executive producer for a couple of years at that time, and he said, look, if this is something that interests you, I can see, you're kind of drifting in that direction. You have, some of the managerial rigor that I think could fit for a producer. He said, give it a whirl. Nothing to lose. So I did, and I was lucky he was on the hiring committee. Right. It was a pretty terrifying process, because I don't know if you ever met David, but he's a pretty terrifying guy. He looks very nice on the outside.
Yeah, I've seen him. I've been in the room with him.
Yeah, steel trap. Yeah. Every part of him is a steel trap.
Okay.
And so you can't be careless around any part of him.
So you got up your game.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was that first gig? What was that first film?
As a producer?
Yeah.
What was the first gig? Oh, Lord, yes. It was the NFB's first stereoscopic 3D short since McLaren had done some stuff, I think, in the 70s or something like that. And it was a piece. It was drawn by a filmmaker named George Geertsen, and it was to celebrate. There was an agency. For the life of me, I can't remember what they were called, but there was an agency in Ottawa that had something to do with Canadian heritage, not the Heritage Ministry, but something to do with heritage. And they wanted a short film that they could use as kind of a trailer and a promo piece that would illustrate, sort of an unfolding of Canadian history from, it was conventional, so from the time of discovery to current times. Yeah. And so we thought George was perfect for that, because George's style was very fluid, and he used a lot of animated transitions. And so, it was a 1-minute stereoscopic 3D piece using this fairly innovative technology that used color stereoscopy. And so you had prismatic glasses, and so things that, I can't remember if it was red was far or red was near, but you used different colors for where you wanted the line to be in space. Okay. And it was great, and we built it as a screensaver.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. Screensaver. So there are people out there going, screensaver, what the hell's a screensaver?
So as an animation producer with the NFB, like highlights, challenging experiences, most rewarding experiences, give me some highlights.
Challenging experiences. Well, they're all challenging, because they're all brand new films, and they're all different filmmakers. I think the most important part of any producer's job, as you know, Mike, is that human interaction, the relationship development, and maintaining
trust.
Trust. And these are films that take 2 years, sometimes longer, but on average 2 years. 2 years is a long time to spend in what is a fairly intimate relationship. And so that's always the most difficult. And I actually spend, we at the NFB, we have 3 phases of development. We have 3 phases for projects. We have what's called an investigate, which is a very small development phase, and then we do larger development where we do proof of concept and scheduling and budgeting and actually.
What is proof of concept to you guys?
To see if a project is going to be viable, to see if the technique, the filmmaker's skills, the story as proposed, the projected schedule and the projected budget will all come
Do you walk
together.
through any of it at that point? Or, I mean, as a proof of concept, I mean, when you're only dealing with short films, it's not like it's like a pilot for a series
No,
or that kind of thing.
we'll generally do a very small animation.
You do like a test animation?
Yeah, just to see if it's actually going to come together, and then production. And I tend to use the investigate stage as a trial period to see first of all if the filmmaker and I can actually work together, and in many cases then to see if the filmmaker can actually work inside of the film board construct, which is for many independent filmmakers a pretty alien and foreboding prospect. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, from my perspective, I think working for the NFB as a filmmaker can be quite liberating and generous. But I think, if you've been an independent for a long time, you've never worked with a producer, and you've never worked inside of an organization that big, it can be fraught. And so I use the investigate as a gauge whether we can get along.
Well, you're going to work with this person for 2 years.
Yeah.
So you have to know that you can work with them for 2 years.
And then to see if they're actually going to survive inside of the NFB.
And how do you gauge that if they're going to survive? Like what's...
It's a matter of open-mindedness. How willing are they to accommodate, to accept some of the constrictions that the NFB imposes? Administrative, bureaucratic, and creative input. And then just to see how open they are to appreciating that filmmaking in that context is a really collaborative exercise.
Once you're in that process of investigation, and maybe you could describe what some of those constraints are for an independent filmmaker working with the NFB.
Right. Well, I'll talk only about 100% NFB productions, because a co-production is a very different beast. But an NFB production is an NFB production. It's and this is contentious for many filmmakers, but it's owned. The project is owned by the National Film Board. The copyright to the film belongs to us. That is a constraint for a lot of filmmakers, despite the fact that, as we both know, it's almost impossible to make money from short animation films, although that's changing, I think. So that's something that filmmakers have to get their heads around, and they have to get their heads around the fact that they're working with a producer. And in the film board's case, a producer is a creative producer. We're not just an administrative or management producer. And that means, my colleague in the animation studio, Marcy Page, and I were actually both animation filmmakers in previous lives. And we've been producers now. Well, Marcy's been a producer for coming on 24 years, and I've been for 15, 16 years. So, we feel we have creative input to contribute to a project. The balance for us, of course, is leaving the space for the filmmaker because it's their film. But that dynamic, that relationship is difficult for filmmakers who are coming to the film board for the first time. On top of that, there's an executive producer often who feels that they need to contribute in a way. There are just administrative constraints around buying things. Just buying animation paper if you wanted to buy animation paper. The nuts and bolts of making a film. It's all it all goes through a purchasing
Right, because you guys also, and the NFB is also very well known for varying techniques.
Yep.
So each film coming to you can have very specific technical requirements.
Yep.
So that's where you're getting into. I mean, if there's budgetary constraints, that kind of thing as well, that can certainly affect, although that's should also be one of the perks, because an independent filmmaker certainly are dealing with budgetary constraints themselves.
Right. More profound usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so it's unlike television animation or serial animation. We don't have the luxury of developing a formula for production and then amortizing that or building on that. It's almost always a brand new pipeline every time. And the NFB as a whole is big. We're I think a little under 400 employees across the country, but the animation studio itself in the English program is quite small. We are fewer than a dozen. Okay. And so that's producers, execs, some technical people, and some administration people. And so we're not a big operation. We're probably carrying a dozen projects in production at any given time. And so, if you do the math, you figure out, okay, well, there are 2 technical experts in the studio. They can only devote so much time to a project
right.
per week or per month. And, filmmakers have to get, they have to schedule themselves so that they are as productive as possible while waiting for experts and resources to come work with them. That's something that an independent filmmaker is, not used to, and can be very frustrating and understandably frustrating. But we just don't have the resources, and we do our best to minimize those kinds of internal costs, so that as much of our budget is available for production. Okay. And not for staff.
Yeah, not for the administration.
Exactly. But it's there is administration involved at the NFB. We're a government agency. We're bound by Treasury Board rules, right. by a whole set of rules that come from Ottawa, and there are just things that we can't do.
Well, what about agenda and mandate? Certainly the NFB, the animation department, has been very successful in the awards category. You're one of our cultural exports. We see a film every other year, it seems, at the Oscars. Certainly, you guys have had a lot of success in this area. Is there? When you're getting into the meat with a creator, is there a mandate there? Is an agenda there that you're trying to create these award-winning? Is that goal part of the process? Is that Oscar part of the agenda? Because it brings a lot to the table, right? You've got those
sure.
statutes.
We're always programming to the Oscar. Exactly. No, we're not. We're not. We don't. No, it's it's okay. I'll back up just a little bit, and I'll say it's not democratic. I don't want anyone out there to think that it's a purely democratic selecting process, okay. Because it's not. There are 2 producers in the English program animation studio. We probably get 200 proposals a year. It might be fewer now. We can take maybe 7 or 8% and move them into some form of production. We're making judgment calls. We're making instinctive intuition calls. We're selecting projects that we like. We're not, there's not a formula for selecting projects. Okay, it's got that. There's none of that. It's in many ways it's intuitive for us, and that has flaws. That methodology has flaws. I select when I look back at my slate of productions. I tend to be drawn towards films that I think I would have made. Yeah. Were I still a filmmaker. Yeah. That just can't be helped. I'm a human being.
So do you look at it then as it's your body of work to a certain degree? You're working with these other people, sure, but it's still...
It is. I consider my producer slate to be at least partly my work.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's me going out into the world, meeting interesting filmmakers. It's me encouraging them to come to the film board with ideas. It's me helping them craft the kernel of an idea or the two-page proposal into something that is in fact going to be viable and potentially successful. So yeah, I do consider the oeuvre, my oeuvre, to be my oeuvre. The films are the filmmaker's films, but the body of my slate is that's my work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how do you? I mean, certainly your guys are getting pitched stuff all the time, but do you go out and seek out talent?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you do it?
Yeah. Going to festivals is, I find, the best way, primarily because I love meeting the filmmakers. As eccentric as animators can be, and as horribly shy and antisocial as many animators can be, as I was when I was younger, I just like meeting filmmakers and engaging them and talking about what they do and why they do it. So for me, that's the primary motor engine. Is I go, and if there's a film I like, and if the filmmaker is there, I will engage the filmmaker immediately and just talk. And if I think they're a fit, I will invite them to make a submission.
So it's really it's an audition all the time.
It's always an audition, but I do my best also to not let their performance influence how I'm imagining their potential.
Right.
Because they are so sometimes socially awkward and antisocial, animators are often pretty terrible at presenting themselves, and but they may be just an inherently great animator or storyteller or artist, and so then my job is to help them bring that out and emerge in a way. So there's that. I do tons of online research. I rely on recommendations from colleagues. So you've sent me a couple of things, and my door is wide open to all of that. So it's references, it's word of mouth, it's being out in festivals, it's going to not just animation festivals, going to all sorts of festivals and seeing filmmakers. Recently, I've been looking at directors of short, live action or experimental film, who seem to have an eye for detail, for very fine detail and composition, because I think it's possible then for somebody like that, with that kind of visionary rigor, to make a translation, to make a switch into animation, because they're not thinking vista, they're thinking detail.
And so would you then, if you're dealing with someone like that who doesn't animate themselves, but you think they have a vision, how do you make an animated film with them then?
Then they would operate much more in a conventional directorial role. They would be the director of the film, and then there would be a small team of animation experts.
And you put that together with them?
And we would work together.
So is it a question then of finding compatible animators for their vision, or is it just some animators?
It's completely a case of building the correct team for each project. And so there has to be sympathy, there has to be empathy between everyone on the team. That I can see that style. You want there to be some of that unspoken understanding amongst the team.